On today's World Insight, trouble with cryptocurrencies losing value while under scrutiny, a blip in the markets, or an inevitable trend.
It's from cash dollars, physical money, to electronic. And that's actually a big deal in the US if it happens.
I'm a storyteller.
And he's an accomplished lensman, both in the worlds of fashion and politics, capturing larger-than-life images. A catch-up chat with ace photographer, Laton. Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin took a beating this week, losing values after weekend comments from the new U.S. Treasury Secretary and the CEO of electric carmaker Tesla. Trouble began when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that Bitcoin was extremely insufficient, though she did say digital currencies were likely here to stay. For his part, Tesla CEO Elon Musk tweeted Bitcoin and Ethereum prices were too high. Those were enough to spook markets, triggering a sell-off. So the question now is this a blip in the crypto markets or the beginning of an inevitable slide? And what about that competition between Bitcoin and government-sponsored digital currencies? Let's loop in our panelists. They have their very different views. For more on digital currency, joining us in Beijing, Dr. Jay Huang, founding partner of Jaystone Capital and former managing director of Intel China. In Bangkok, Jeffrey Towson, Guanghua School of Management, Peking University, he is with. In New York, Anthony Chen, former JP Morgan Chase chief economist. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program. How should we see the apparent enthusiasm of digital currency both in the U.S. and in China? Dr. Huang, would you like to take that first?
I think they are just digitized paper money, although there's lots of enthusiastic and discussion about that. But fundamentally, I do not see they have any fundamental differences as to US dollars or RMB. It's just a digital version of paper money. So that's basically my view on that. Although I could be wrong, I'm not an economist, so I could be wrong.
Thank you for your humbleness. But Mr. Chan, what's your take? Is it just a digital version of paper money, as Mr. Huang illustrated?
I think of those as more of a stable currency, so you're not going to have as much fluctuation as you would with Bitcoin, which is very volatile. In fact, in the last 24 hours, we've seen an 18% volatility. You would not see that under a stable type of digital coin. And in fact, many banks, including my previous employer, JP Morgan Chase, was working on a stable currency. And the reason for that is to make transactions a lot quicker, to make inter-border transactions a lot quicker and smoother, and perhaps less transaction costs.
Right.
So there is a lot of talk about digital currencies, but again, the goal is to try to make transactions as frictionless as possible.
Mr. Towson, your take.
If you're talking about China, it's not a huge deal for the average user because you're already on mobile payment anyway. So it's clicking one button versus the other. I think that's true, that it's not a huge deal there. But if you look at the US, we haven't seen a major shift onto mobile payment yet. US, it's really changing, not so much, from mobile pay to digital yuans or digital dollars. It's from cash dollars, physical money, to electronic. And that's actually a big deal in the US if it happens. It appears to be pretty slow despite the talk by various government officials. We don't see a lot of action on it. So it would probably be a bigger step up for the US than, say, China, where it's kind of normal to pay with your phone for everything anyways.
Over the past year, 2020, 3 cities with a population about 10 to 17 million have been testing digital currency, for example, Shenzhen and several others. Meanwhile, they have been testing hypothetically in for the year 2022 during the Winter Olympic Games, how digital RMB might be used during that situation. Of course, it's hypothetical. But Mr. Huang, so what is really behind this? Why, when China is having the electronic payment so popular, still working so much on digital currency and trying to do it every step of the way?
Whether behind of the mobile payment is a digital currency or it's ordinary currency, it's literally transparent to the end user. I do not see the end user enthusiastic about it.
There is an interesting...
From the central bank point of view,
yeah, please go ahead.
They may have their own motivation to promote the RMB version of a digital currency.
Mr. Huang, how do you see the possibility that we might have a different choice, a diversity of digital version of currencies, both, the electronic payment that has been so popular, popularized by the private companies in China, and a RMB government kind of version of digital payment? How are we going to see that potential?
I personally thinking all those central controlled digital currency, whether controlled by the government or by central bank or by big corporation like Facebook, for example, I think they are the same. I do not see fundamental differences. But the Bitcoin is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
It's not centralized controlled. So if you're really thinking of a digital currency as something to excited about, I can only think about this a centralized controlled currency.
Yeah.
Currently, the big one is the Bitcoin.
Ms. Yellen, in her latest remarks regarding Bitcoin, she's been warning the public about, the use of it in money laundering and illegal cases, rather than its popularity already in the world. On the other hand, she has also been warning of the extra energy that has been wasted as a result of using Bitcoin compared to other types of digital currency. So, Mr. Chen, would you help us to understand how do you see this debate inside the U.S. as well?
The central banks here in the United States, as I said, feel that Bitcoin is competition, and therefore they're not going to be big cheerleaders of Bitcoin. And so the best way to counteract the popularity of Bitcoin is to create a currency itself that is similar to Bitcoin. With regard to the energy, yes, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. And in fact, some people have made the comparison that Bitcoin uses more energy than the entire electricity consumption in Argentina. However, if you look at all the appliances in the United States that are not being in use, but they're plugged in, they also consume energy, and that energy is equivalent to all the energy that Bitcoin uses. So yeah, you can make all these comparisons, but I think at the end of the day is that these currencies like Bitcoin represent real competition because it's decentralized and they have no control over it, and therefore they want to come up with something that they have much better control over.
Mr. Towson, help us to understand your perspective in this regard. This competition, apparently very interesting.
Bitcoin, what it is very good at is speculation, and it's pretty good, or at least it appears to be, an alternate place to store your wealth. And that's, I think, what a lot of people are doing, which has arguably been heightened in the last year as the US Treasury in particular has lost all sense of let's just not print money left and right and effectively devalue everyone's dollars. What are they going to do? Well, now we know what they're going to do. They're going to shift their money into Bitcoin and protect themselves from inflation. So that's a problem for the US Treasury, and it is some much needed competition to what I would consider a lack of financial discipline.
We see some very interesting things. There are several layers of it, it seems, from your earlier conversation. One is the competition between the government, or at least the the money authority of various governments and also the private sector as well as individuals, for example, behind Bitcoin. Secondly, we have also seen this apparent competition among countries, among central bankers about digital currencies of their own country and vis-a-vis one another. For example, digital RMB, digital US dollar, and the list can go on. And meanwhile, we have also seen the public both enthusiasm about all these different versions of money, but at the same time, the issue of privacy as well. As we know, their electronic payment, for example, there has been a lot of issues about privacy vis-a-vis what is information that needs to be shared in order to guarantee the security situation. So there are a lot of layers of this discussion. Dr. Huang, come in here. To you, which one is the most crucial?
I personally think that Bitcoin has come a long way. And I personally believe it's continued going down and maybe become an alternative and to gold or to US dollars, especially, as Jeff said, people lose trust on the US government, the self-control on printing money. We see this incentive plan, it's an initiative, and then a few $1 trillion today, next week another few $1 trillion, and coming up. This speed of printing out money really get people scared and lose their trust on the US dollars. So I think that the Bitcoin, Ms. Yellen didn't say, maybe she do not want to say is, as Jeff said, what if Bitcoin become an alternative to the US dollars? And then what that impact to the US dollars and the unique position?
Do you see the roadmap that long from here, Mr. Huang, since you asked that question?
No, actually, and I buying the Cassie Wood and ARK investment argument, and they think this wave of Bitcoin enthusiastic primarily driven by big institutional and asset allocation. They claim if big institutions started to diversify their asset allocation, depending on how much money they put in, even smaller percentage, less than 10%, it could drive Bitcoin to 400,000 to 500,000 US dollar per coin level.
The Bitcoin thing has become so volatile. It's 18% over the past week as a result of remarks coming from Secretary Yellen, to say the least. So how are investors going to look at that, including institutional investors?
Well, I think that the correct way to look at an asset class like Bitcoin is to acknowledge that it's very volatile, and also to acknowledge that if you're going to invest, you have to invest funds that you want to save for long periods of time, and only a small portion of your portfolio that would be categorized as being very, very risky. Longer term, I think that the prospects for Bitcoin are very favorable. But anytime you see fluctuations as large as 18% in a single day, you have to be nervous. I still remember in 2017 that Bitcoin had a great year, and yet the year after, Bitcoin values went down by 80%. So even the big proponents, the big institutional houses on Wall Street are saying that you should only allocate as an investor something in the neighborhood of about 1 to 3% of your portfolio towards Bitcoin. If you do that, I think you'll be fine. But if you put a bigger percentage of that, then I think you'll be very nervous by the volatility in this asset class.
And that's likely to continue, isn't it, Mr. Chen? I mean, Secretary Yellen could say something today, and she could say something other days. Other central bankers could also have a different view. Governments could come out. International institutions of governments could also speak out about that issue. So that would make the picture continues to be volatile, likely. So is it fair? Is it a reality that every investor has to face right now?
I think you have to face the reality that there's going to be volatility in this asset class. And it's not just Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. In fact, this week, we also heard some comments from someone that has a vested interest in seeing Bitcoin go up, namely the head of Tesla, Elon Musk himself, saying that the value was a little bit higher, despite the fact that he was talking against his book because he has $1.5 billion invested. And so the price obviously went down. So investors have to realize that a lot of this talk is going to be noise, but the long-term prospects, in my judgment, are still very favorable for Bitcoin, but you have to have volatility.
But what about this? You all talk about the US dollar and the current situation of printing US dollar to solve the problems inside the United States. So Bitcoin is one of those phenomenon that's likely to challenge the future of US dollar. But I wonder whether that will be a revolutionary possibility, or are we going to see, the fact that it's not being controlled by central bank of the United States, but it's being controlled by some other individuals or institutions likely in the near future? Mr. Huang, help us to understand that.
I think, this is a great question. I personally think it's going to be revolutionary. So far, there are over 20 petitions to get a Bitcoin ETF set up in the United States, a stock exchange market, all get shut down. Now, in Canada, the Canadian regulator already approved the 2 Bitcoin ETF, and the Australian government is already on the process of approving another one. And I expect to see a lot of government and started to recognize the importance and also diversification aspect of the Bitcoin, started to legalize and then the Bitcoin. I think the next step, and I would guess the U.S. government is coming to, and the regulators coming to embracing it instead of oppose it. And especially if I were the central bank of China, I would be the first one to champion and embrace the Bitcoin, because this is the only feasible way to break up the US dollar monopoly in international transactions. Any strategic thinker and the sovereign nation, if you do not like it to be controlled by the US financial and institution, should consider Bitcoin as an alternative.
But you said yourself, Mr. Huang, that at this moment, the security issues related to Bitcoin is not solved.
No. I don't think the security has any issue with Bitcoin. And I think that Ms. Yellen says that the issue is the criminals are using
taking advantage of
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, before Bitcoin come to the world, which currency criminals are using the most? Even today, which currency the criminal are used the most? It's not Bitcoin. And then I think that
what is it then? Maybe you need to give us the answer.
Oh, of course, the US dollars, right? Everybody knows it.
Okay. You need to say it.
You cannot shut down a currency because then the criminals are using it, right? You never do that. I agree with 100%. Mr. Chen said it's all about allocation. And it's not wise, and then you allocate a huge chunk of your asset into Bitcoin. However, even very small portion of the allocation, it's going to jack up the Bitcoin price. And the ARC did that calculation. It's for Standard and Poor and 500 companies, if they allocate 1% of their cash on Bitcoin, it's going to jack up the price by $40,000 US.
Right. Are you going to be as much a cheerleader as Dr. Huang, Mr. Towson, about Bitcoin?
I mean, it's a new animal. It's not just fiat currency backed by the government and private currency, which you could argue gold is a type of private currency. And so we've seen that dynamic for a long time. Do you hold gold or do you hold dollars? But this is even different than that because nobody controls Bitcoin. It is decentralized with a fixed volume by definition. So it's a technological digital form of gold, if anything else. And now, we've never seen anything like this. This is a new thing. So there's going to be a lot of surprises along the way. I generally agree with the portfolio approach. I think it's a nice addition to the situation, and it might be the right technology at the right moment, given particularly the US government's printing spree. You know, this has come along at the right moment where people are thinking about, look, my bank account is getting worth less and less every day because of what they're doing in DC.
Yeah.
Let's put some money over here. So yeah, it's a bit of a technology of the moment at the right time.
Yeah. Mr. Chen, your take, that apparent competition between Bitcoin and what Secretary Yellen might believe as the best solution?
I think that in the end, Bitcoin will win, and I'll tell you why. Because as you all know, the supply of Bitcoin is limited, and as you start to see more people and more institutions demanding Bitcoin, you don't have to be an economist to figure out that if the supply is fixed, but the demand continues to increase over time, there's only one thing that can happen to the price, and that is the price goes higher and higher.
Yeah.
So that is why, over the long term, the price of Bitcoin will continue to go higher. In fact, if you look at Bitcoin wallets today, it's still not democratized. 2% of the wallets of Bitcoin is estimated to hold as much as 90% or more of all the Bitcoin out there. To the extent that that continues to expand over time, it's going to put even further upward pressure on prices.
Anthony Chen, Jeffrey Townsend, last but not least, Jay Huang, thank you so much. It's an interesting conversation. Let's see what's going to happen, possibly very soon. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.